Hello, and thank you very much for joining us here. Very welcome to what I hope will be a very interesting seminar about preservation of digital objects. This seminar is organized in connection to a project, a large research project called PERICLES, which is funded by EU. And we have quite a lot of interesting people here who are interested in related issues related to digital preservation. But before we start, can I just ask you, how many of you know what this is? Yes? So a second question, how many of you today have got some electronic device with you, like an iPad or a laptop or a smartphone or something similar? So almost everyone. So considering the devices that you have with you today or the devices that you use every day at work or at home, how many of you will be able to tell me what's on this? Not many. So when I talk to my colleagues within the project, they often talk about 3 different changes. One of them is change in technology. So that's why this has become almost obsolete. Then they also talk about change in culture and values and practices. And the third change would be the change in language, the way we use language, meaning, and semantics. And PERICLES deals at least with 2 of these 3 changes. So we can start and talk about who the panel are. And today we have Christine Sauter, who is the project manager of PERICLES, and she is from King's College London. Then we have Sanya Halli, who is from DigiSam, which is an organization that which is at the National Archives, and is responsible for the Swedish National Coordination of Digitization. She is very interested in digital preservation and digital cultural heritage and preservation of that, and she's been involved in many different projects, both national and international. Then we have my colleague Stratos Kontopoulos, who is from CERT ITI, which is a large research institute in Greece, and he is a member of PERICLES and a senior researcher. Then we have Göran Christiansson, who is archival director at the Regional Archives in Lund, which is a department of the National Archives of Sweden. And he has previously had the research and development at the National Archives. He has been project manager for development of different systems and databases, and he too has been involved in many different projects and interested in preservation of digital objects. Then we have a colleague from the Royal Library, Bengt Neis, and he is an IT architect and operation manager at the National Library. And he has worked with archiving and standardization and interested in long-term preservation of digital content, and has also been involved in development of systems and whatever, and different projects as well. And finally, we have a colleague from the Gothenburg University, Maria Kavalin-Eimer, who is whose PhD is in history and works at the Department of History, but historical studies, and she is, has special responsibility for the education of archival science. So, very interesting panel, everyone interested in digital preservation. And like I said, this is organized in connection to PERICLES, so we might as well go to the project manager and ask her to tell us a little bit what PERICLES is about. Christine.
Thank you, Nazreen. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I think, as we've seen from the reaction, you don't need to be a digital expert, a digital preservation expert, to know that digital files and data nowadays are very fragile. In the last 2.5 decades, the research on preservation has increased exponentially. So I think the question the big questions that are asked for preservation, which are about access and reuse, is how can we enhance discovery, which is a big research field, how can we support management, or how can we counteract the rapidity, the speed with which technology becomes obsolescent. PERICLES situates itself in the management field. How do we support management? If I may say very simply, in a very simplified way, a curator was a lot about where the main decision-making process of a curator was keep it or delete it. And if you keep it, for how long do you keep it, how do you keep it, how much effort do you put into it, and so on. Now there is a new aspect that comes into this decision-making process, and that's the question of change. How to react to change, or how to proactively move within a changing environment. The thing about digital environments is that they are so complex that they have an intricate network of dependencies that need a lot of different types of knowledge to understand exactly where these dependencies lie, not only within the digital environment, but also between that environment and the humans that operate it. And this is very diverse, and in order to make an informed decision about the impact of change, or to understand the impact of change, you need to have this knowledge, which is not always available in an organization. PERICLES is therefore proposing to introduce a technological layer into your management system in the widest sense that would support this decision-making process, which would mean that you would need to translate, or that's our proposal, you translate this knowledge about the dependencies into a model, and Stratos is going to say more about the models, which will lead to a model-driven management and ultimately to model-driven preservation. Meaning you translate reality, the dependencies of the current reality into a model, but then the tricky thing is you want actually to understand what happens if I change this reality. So you would simulate another reality into which you have introduced the change. And then that's the real tricky bit, is how do you make machines analyze the difference between those two. So the simulated reality, which includes the change that you want to introduce or is being introduced externally, and your current situation. And this is what PERICLES has focused on, trying to find ways to have something like a dynamic model implemented into your systems. And we are working with 2 use case partners to showcase this layer, because we are not proposing a final tool, we're actually tool or system, we are proposing an approach, if you like, in order to make this clear how this approach should be implemented by people who will in future produce systems. We ourselves, of course, produce a test bed, together with the use case partners Tate and BUSOP, which is the User Support Operations Center for the ISS. So we have 2 very different use case partners, one whose remit it is to actually preserve, and not only preserve complex objects, but really difficult objects, I mean artifacts being unique and original and having to remain that way. Whereas on the other hand, we have the space science people, or the operations center, that deals with unique data in a very different kind of way, but has no remit to preserve in the way a museum or an archive is preserving it. So although they know they have to keep this data, storage is the only thing they sort of think of. But they're providing data that will never be repeatable. So it's very important to keep that data, but they have no real practices in place for preserving that data. So these are our 2 use case partners, and with them we showcase how such a layer, what it would look like, and we provide tools that are not yet available, that take on the role that you need to provide that kind of layer. But we are not saying you have to use that tool. We know that in the future, better tools will be available that take on the role that we need to provide that layer into. But this is a research project, so we hope to initiate and convince people of actually going further with that in terms of development. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we talk about preservation of digital objects, we hear people talk about linked data, and I wonder, Sanya, can you please tell us a little bit what linked data is and from the preservation point of view?
Thank you. Well, linked data is actually a new technology which is used for making data more available and more useful. And what does actually means linked data or linked open data, which we often talk about? From the preservation point of view, there are different ways today to make data available and useful and to preserve it. And preservation of the digital information actually means that we can, that future users can open information, understand it, and also understand the context that it was made in. So how do we do it with linked data, and what is linked data? Well, linked data is actually linkable data, which means digital information in machine-readable formats. And to make it open, it is also licensed in a way that is machine-readable, and which means that this is freely open to freely be used by anybody and reused. So this technology actually gives a completely new way of use of digital information from the cultural heritage institution, for example, because now the users are not only researchers and people looking for the information, but also developers which wants to make new products or new applications and services and tools with this information. And well, while interlinking those different data objects and data sets, we actually create linked open data then. So this is also this is a great opportunity, but also a great challenge from the digital preservation point of view, because there's actually no central administration of those different formats and different ontologies and for those interlinked data sets. So it is interesting to see what methods are used today and what methods will be used in the future to preserve even these interlinked data. What people use today is often that those interlinked data sets are preserved as the linkable data with links that are pointing on different other data sets. And they are preserved as databases or web documents or annotation web documents, so in different ways. And it is interesting how to manage all these data sets in the future, because it is not possible that everybody make their own data clouds with those interlinked informations just to be sure that it is preserved for the future as it is in the moment when you were looking at it. And it's also very connected to the question of persistence and persistence identifiers, which are actually code strings which you use to publish a data object online often. And how ontologies also are managed to make those linkable formats for the future.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Yeah, but I think when we hear about linked data, it reminds us quite a lot about what you have been doing, Stratos, in PERICLES related to ontologies. Can you tell us what is the relationship between the two, relating to each other?
Sure. So, linked data and ontologies. I don't know how many of you are familiarized with these two terms. They are sibling technologies. We are referring to cutting-edge, state-of-the-art technologies for knowledge representation. You might have heard them in the context of what we usually call the semantic web, or Web 3.0. So in PERICLES, we follow an approach that is quite related to linked data. We heavily rely on ontologies. Ontologies are a knowledge representation formula model for representing domains of interest. So within PERICLES we have various levels of ontology models. We have a higher level of more abstract ontology, which is called the linked resource model, the LRM. This is developed by another partner within the project, Xerox. And this is a very abstract upper-level ontology for representing and modeling dependencies between digital resources. Then comes the middle layer ontology, which is called the digital ecosystem model. It relies on the LRM, but extends it with various notions for representing digital ecosystems, infrastructures, services, and other related constructs. And then comes our part, which is the domain ontologies that have to do with representing the various specifics within the two domains of interest. As Christine said, in PERICLES we are working on two domains, the space science and the art and media domains. So we are naturally developing two ontology models for these two domains. The aim of these two ontologies is not to exhaustively model the domains and all the related properties and interrelationships. We are mostly focusing on trying to model the digital preservation related risks in these domains, and this is actually done for the first time. So we are trying to represent the impacts of the various changes that happen in these domains, and we also enrich the ontologies with computational modules for computing the impact and the risk for each change. The representations within the ontologies are not only representing, they don't really have to do only with representing the content, so we don't really represent only the resources and their metadata, who created the resource, etc. We also enrich the ontologies with representing context. So whatever surrounds the resources is also within the ontology. Which actors are involved with this resource? What activities is this resource playing a role in, etc. So whatever has to do with the context, the environment, or the context of use of a resource, all this information is stored within the model. Within the project, we have developed these ontologies collaboratively with the domain experts, with Tate and Buson. However, the project also is aimed at developing a methodology for equipping, let's say, future customers or knowledge organizations in order to enrich and develop their own models themselves. Finally, I would like to add that all this approach with the ontologies serves what we call the model-driven preservation approach. So in essence, we try to be proactive, we create a model of the ecosystem, and we try to simulate changes in the ecosystem before actually performing these changes. So this way we can introduce a change into the model, we can see what impact this change is going to have to the resources or to all other interconnected constructs and resources, and if the impact is not does not lead to something dangerous for the object itself, so that we don't lose the object and the accessibility to it in the future, then we can accept the change that we introduced. Otherwise, we can reject it. So this is paramount for our approach. We introduce this novel model-driven methodology which tries to handle digital preservation in a proactive way and not reactive, contrary to other relevant projects.
Yeah, thank you. So then we have two colleagues, both from the National Library and National Archives, and obviously you both work with preservation of digital objects, but there must be some similarities and differences between you. So maybe each one of you could take some time and tell us a little bit what you see as the important issues at your own organizations and compare them. So maybe we can start with you, Göran.
Yes. I'm from the National Archives of Sweden, and in the National Archives, standards are very important to use when it comes to long-term preservation. And it's not just standards in Sweden, it's an international cooperation between National Archives worldwide in trying to be able to find a standard that could be reliable over time. And if we have to change standards in the future, we will do that simultaneously. And in Sweden, the National Archives have the advantage compared to the Royal Library that we can, in accordance to the Archival Act, regulate what kind of standards the authorities in Sweden should use. So, for instance, if we have file formats that should be used, or standards for descriptions, we can regulate that and say that the authorities should be using them before transferring the information to the Swedish National Archives. And it's also important to understand that we don't preserve the application. We only preserve the data and the documentation. So, for instance, if you have the Försäkringskassan, who deals with social insurance issues, and they use a record management system, when they have decided what decision should be taken, it's the decision that we preserve, the document saying what the decision said. And we will not preserve the software, but we will preserve the documentation of the process for taking that decision. And so we can understand how the decision was taken. And this is also to understand that we use the migration strategy today, but we are very interested in the emulation strategy that also Bengt will talk about. But so far we think that the migration strategy is the most safe at the moment. The file formats we will regulate so far is, for instance, is TIFF format for images, is PDF-A for documents. We don't preserve Word perfect documents or Word documents. We use XML for emails and databases. And for archival descriptions, there is an international standard called International Standard for Archival Description and the International Standard for Archival Authority records that we use worldwide. And we have national implementation of them. And if you have the possibility to go to the National Archives website and look in the National Archival database, that database is based on those standards. And that makes it possible to exchange information worldwide and cross-search information across archives, libraries, and museums. And all that information that we keep and store is kept in an electronic archives in accordance with the standard for trusted digital repositories. And that is to be able to store it in a safe way into the future, for the eternity. That's our main goal, to save this information for eternity. So that's what I wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. So, Bengt, what maybe you can talk about from your perspective from the National Library?
Yes, the situation at the National Library, or the Royal Library, is somewhat different compared to the National Archives. Our collections are quite diverse. We receive content based on legal deposit. There is a special law for electronically published documents on the web. And we get donations, we harvest the web, we have our own digitization. And that because of that, we have collections consisting of television, radio, computer games, web pages, different kind of file formats like word processor formats, etc. And we cannot say to the people, to the organizations delivering the content that we want them in a specific format, but the law stipulates that we have to receive them in the format that they were published. So it's quite different for us. So when we are looking on how to preserve this content, we have to take both the migration track as well as the emulation track or strategy into consideration. And this also affects what kind of metadata we store of the objects. We have, for migration, you usually store technical metadata about the file formats, what version of them, perhaps what software that created them and so forth. But for the emulation, we also need a lot of information about the runtime environment for the software. So emulation is quite widely used within the computer gaming society at the moment. And as an example from our library, in a project some years ago, we received a computer from a Swedish writer, and we extracted the content from that computer. And we have Word files, Microsoft Word files created in the 1990s. And if we try to open them in Microsoft Word today, it doesn't recognize them. So it says, well, there is a file format. We can extract the data. So I get the text, the Swedish special characters are gone, the layout is gone, the typefaces and the fonts are gone, but I can read what it says. And to be able to render that kind of document, we probably need to create an emulation environment with the software and printer drivers that was used at the time to see it properly. So emulation is a real issue for us. And these are the kind of strategies that we use to try to make have future generations experience the games and documents that we create in real time.
Thank you for that. I have some follow-up question that we can discuss in a little bit. But I also thought I'd talk to you, Maria, and maybe you can give us a little bit of insight from the educational point of view. Obviously, you are not working with digital preservation yourself, but you are educating the people who probably will be working with digital preservation in the future. So tell us a little bit what's happening there and potential challenges or the way you deal with digital preservation in your education.
I will try. And I have to say that I'm mostly speaking for Gothenburg University and our education. And I think I saw one of our earlier students, former students here. Yes. And we are, as many of the education programs in archival science, at the Faculty of Humanities, which makes a huge problem for us to find the knowledge to ensure the competence for teaching in digital preservation. And why is it so important? The archival profession, the archivist, it has changed so much from being someone working with paper, taking care of paper as the final stage of handling information. Now they are part of the process of handling information from the beginning to the end. So the whole profession has changed. And for me, it has really been a challenge to find the expertise, to find people who are prepared to teach, and also to teach in a way that functions, that communicates with the students we have. Many times historians, archaeologists, not people used to work with data sets and not knowing what models mean. So it's really a challenge. We have solved it, working very hands-on, I would say. We have a person who works with digital preservation as an archivist, and he really goes through the question of laws and regulations, because the question is not just what do we need to preserve, but how we follow the law. And this is a question of serving the citizens. The digital preservation is there in the favor of the citizens. So it's so important that it's done in the right way. And many times our students, they might be working with it, but the important thing is that they know what they are talking about, that they understand which demands should put on the people working with the data sets, with the preservation. So it's a question of giving concepts, giving language, of discussing what the appraisal of information. So I think that's the most important for us. The other thing, I'm a historian, as I said. For me, the question of digital preservation is important there too, I would say, because it's so easy to see now. All our students is writing about things, subjects being digitalized. They are not interested in the other things. So I see a danger there too, that there will be a bias. So we only study the things that are digitalized, which means that it's so important to have this kind of meetings where we can communicate, discuss, and open up the dialogue between people from the data sector with the humanities. Well, I think that was the most important about the education. It is a challenge, and the challenge is in every university in Sweden, because we are mainly at the Faculty of Humanities. And the problem is how to keep up to date, how to know what is happening. And I think we can't learn all the things you do. We have to know what are our questions, what do we need from you, and what is possible to do.
So if you think that a lot of the things that come out of projects such as PERICLES, they are quite technical, how do you see, how can we deliver this to the people who need to work with digital preservation?
I would say some people are much more into it, and they will find you. The question is how to discuss it, how to talk about it, I would say. And I think Christine did a tremendous job making it understandable, making it easy to start. So it's really a question of finding the meeting points. And I think we have, from the National Archive, you have good with the standards of everything. But on the other hand, my students are terrified, I have to say. So it's a question of learning them that it's not dangerous. You need to do this. You don't have to be afraid of the technique. See it as a possibility. But on the other hand, you have to also be critical, because we are sometimes too happy about it, so we forget other parts. The question of what used to be, what should we save and what can be thrown out? But today everything is possible to preserve. But the question is, what do we need? Are we allowed to preserve for how long? And how can we find the information we need all the time? So that is our challenges.
So I hear in many of the discussions here, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like to. Actually, you've pointed out two very important topics that we have been discussing in PERICLES with others. So the first, we have coined a capability gap. This is one of the hot discussions at the moment. This divide between the professionals in the practical field and those who provide solutions for their problems, that they don't have the knowledge to actually communicate properly with each other. That's one of the big issues. And the second big issue nowadays is researchers, and I admit, I think people always look at science more than at humanities as researchers, but they both provide results on the basis of data, and they do not think about preserving their data, only the result. As you were pointing out, the result is being kept somehow, but the important thing is reusing, and reusing data would mean so much to other scientists if they wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. They could use the data already provided, and there is no awareness, not a lot of awareness amongst researchers to do that, and this is another hot topic if you're interested more.
So I hear now we are getting to some of the challenges and they become more obvious, like for example, we want to reuse the information, but a lot of the data, like for example the Word document that you could now scrape the content but not the actual document. That's the problem. So what is a document? Is it just the words, or is it the whole structure of it? So it becomes a problematic issue, plus that digital content is much more easy to manipulate. So it leads us to the question of trust. How can we trust the things that people have preserved? Is it really a representation of the original thing? Like, for example, our partners, the Tate galleries and things, they have software-based art. And it's not just, so the whole room and all the environment is part of the artwork. So how do we know in 100 years' time if that's the same art that that particular artist meant to produce? So we have a few minutes left. Maybe each one of you could take a turn and just quickly say your views about the trust issue or issues that you see as problematic. Shall we start with you, Christine?
Actually, I would like to take stress on this, because the way you introduced it with Tate, I think that's a big issue, and that's very typical with you as an example. The artwork, you could not do what you were saying and just take the content. You have to emulate or whatever do with it. And I think you had a lot of discussions about the famous significant properties as a way to deal with that.
That's true. Regarding, for example, this was a good example with the document and its content. We had a specific use case, one of these art and media use cases that have to do with board digital archives. The data experts there told us that we have a collection of poems, for example, from English poets some years ago, and they don't really want to preserve only the content but also the form and the format of the poem, because the indentation had its own meaning. The empty lines between the verses had their own meaning, so they want to preserve this as well. This shows that we don't really want to only digitize some things, but we also want to keep some other information that is not necessarily the content itself. These things are usually called significant information, and they have to do with what the curators want to preserve for its resource. We have, of course, in the models we are developing, we have also considered that, and we have a specific representation for significant properties, how important they are. So there is a weighting mechanism, what the impact of their absence is, what's the problem if we don't preserve them, etc., etc. So this is again something we have taken into consideration. We can discuss this maybe afterwards. Now moving to the part about trust. When someone hears about trust, there are two things they might think about. One is, do I trust the source of this information? Which is not very relevant in our case. The second is, do I trust the results of a system? So here I have an automated system that tells me which things to preserve. Do I trust what it's telling me to preserve? My experience tells me that I should preserve something else, other properties, etc. Do I trust derivations from the system? Do I trust whatever this system presents? PERICLES and all the other relevant projects are trying to come up with automated solutions or semi-automated solutions. So we need to also provide mechanisms for the people who are going to use these things in order for them to trust the results. In our case, the models I talked about earlier are equipped with explanation facilities. So whatever calculations or derivations or any implicit information that is derived from the models, all this is explained through the explanation facility. There is a step-by-step explanation that informs the user why this thing has been derived, and the person can follow back on the whole reasoning and understand whether this is valid or not.
Anyone else has something to add?
I can say that for the National Archives, of course, the trust is very important. You have to rely on the sources. If it's police records or judge records and so on. So That's why it's important for us to be able to show the authenticity of the document, that the document is what it says it should be. And doing that, it's mostly an administrative issue that you describe what have happened with the documents since it arrived to the National Archives. You can see all the stages when it migrated from one stage, one standard to the other and so on. And we have also checksums and so on, so we can see that it hasn't changed over time. Because if we can't trust the records, we don't know how good the source is, and then we don't know how reliable it is in historical content. So this is very important.
And at the National Library, of course, we work in a similar way. We try to implement different functions in our systems that will kind of log everything that happens to the object from the time we receive it until the day a user or researcher, somebody wants to see it, so they can see what have we done with the document since we received it, and what kind of process has it gone through, and then they can kind of, I don't know how to say this in English, but they can
say it in Swedish.
Yeah. They can make kind of an educated guess on if the document is authentic or if it has changed in some way during our processing.
Anyone else? Maria.
Can you just say that I really agree with you, Göran, about the importance of authenticity and trust and how we're connected it. And I would say it's not just a question for the historical science, it's a question for society, but the question of believing in the material that is left from the authorities, it is the question of state legitimacy in the end, I would say. And I think that is really important. It sounds a bit pretentious, perhaps, but it is important because so much proves that if you don't believe in the records, in the documents, then there is a distrust towards the authorities.
Yes.
Yes, I can also say that if we are looking at the future where all the information is interlinked in different ways and available at the internet, it is really important to stress the question of trust because you would like to see everything at once, the information from the cultural heritage institutions, from the research connected to that information, from different user communities that added information too. But you really need to know what information here is really reliable. And that is the question for the cultural heritage institutions and preservation to work with.
So in this little short time that we've had, we haven't even started scratching the surface of the important issues that is digital preservation. But I hope we have started a little bit of conversation that we can continue in other forums. So a couple of the problems have come up, but there are many challenges that need to be solved and addressed. And we perhaps can keep in contact and follow up this conversation in another forum. And I just want to say that my colleague has prepared some evaluation paper about the seminar, but attached to that there is a slip with the address of PERICLES. If you are interested to learn a little bit more about the project, it's there. Then we are here in Sweden at Högskolan i Borås. So if you are at all interested to know a little bit more or discuss things, please contact us, so we will be here. I have a couple of minutes, so I tell you a couple of things about what we are doing in PERICLES. PERICLES has been a 4-year project, and it will come up to its end by the end of this year or end of January. Within this 4-year project, it was like 10 million euros budget of the project. So there is a huge amount of research that has been done, and quite a lot of software and tools and solutions have been developed within the project. And we actually have a workshop this afternoon that we are going to show a few of those solutions, but unfortunately it got full very fast, if a couple of you, 1 or 2 or 3 max, are very, very interested to see the tools, please contact my colleague Eva, and maybe we can find room for you. Otherwise, we can follow up this later on, and there will be another event in London later on where we have, maybe you can see some of these tools there. You can contact us. We also have created a training module, a training package. So some of our colleagues have contributed content, and we call it PERICLES modular training package. And right now we have 9 different modules in production. And what you can do is you can go to the PERICLES website, and in the middle there is training. By the end of this year, those modules should be completed. You are free to use them, include them in your educational programs or whatever you want to do with them. So each module has got different parts, and there will be lectures and readings and other stuff in there if you are interested. So thank you very much for being here. It was really nice seeing so many of you here, even though it was in English and a little bit not the usual topic of book fair, perhaps. But thank you everyone for being here and accepting our invitation. Very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Nazrin.